All righty. Well, it is 10:02 and we still have, I think, some more folks coming in, but that's okay. We will go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the Bentley Rare Book Museum's virtual Coffee with a Curator program for March, and also happy Women's History Month. I'm very excited about today's program because we are going to talk about three very different women writers from across a few different genres and time periods. And we're going to hear from three fabulous women who attend our programs and who love books and love literature. And they're going to talk a little bit about how they brought these three women partially to my attention and in some really interesting ways. So this is going to be a wonderful program. But as usual, first, we're going to play our game. We're going to play our Where's Andrew? Because I think the suspense is killing us. We want to know where Andrew is. So again, I feel like this one might be a little hard because we are talking about three very different women writers. And so Andrew usually aligns his location with something regarding the theme. Andrew, do you want to tell us kind of which person this might align with, or?
This one is connected to Lady May Wroth, and I have one hint today.
Okay.
Inigo Montoya.
Montoya.
Inigo Montoya.
So Andrew has picked the woman writer who I know the least about out of the three. I'm learning a lot about, thanks to Miss Sandy, I'm learning a lot about her, but oh dear.
So is it in England?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
London?
Not London. It's near London, but England's small enough, everything is.
I know.
Okay, so
There's a six-fingered man.
Right.
So it sounds to me like you're talking about The Princess Bride.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
This location does have a connection to The Princess Bride.
Okay. The six-fingered man, huh?
Mm-hmm.
He was a real person, not just in the movie?
Oh, I think he wasn't real at all, but
Oh, okay.
the movie is always connected to the house.
I can't think of the connection to Mary Roth. I know she was in the court of King James, and her father, uncle, and aunt were patrons of the arts, but I can't think of the connection.
Yeah, I'm struggling as well.
And that's my topic. Mary Roth is my topic.
Yeah, but still, Andrew, well, I pick the topics every week and I never get any of the locations. So don't worry about that. Oh dear, I don't know what's going on. I don't know. Anyone else have a guess before I just wave the white flag?
Greenwich, are you in Greenwich?
No, I'm not.
You should go there.
I've heard it's quite nice.
It's beautiful.
Well, as always, I'm furiously Googling, but I think I figured out Princess Bride and I can't go any further.
Yeah, Andrew, I think you're going to have to tell us.
Well, this is Penhurst Place. It is the ancestral home of the Sidney family, and Mary Roth was born Mary Sidney. But this is the house's library. But the Baron's Hall was used in The Princess Bride in the sword fight between Inigo Montoya and the Six-Fingered Man.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I did not know that. That's actually really cool. And interestingly, so you said that's the ancestral home of the Sidney family. You know, the interesting thing was I'm pretty sure a lot of Lady Mary Roth's her actual library burned, I believe, at her when I believe a lot of hers. So it's cool that there's still the kind of the Sidney family has their place. So that's actually really, really interesting. Thank you. And thank you for that connection with Princess Bride. I was not sure how that was going to connect. I didn't know. Thank you, Andrew. And as usual, Andrew has dropped in a wonderful handout about this location into the chat. So feel free to download that if you want to know more and keep all these. This is awesome stuff, Andrew. Thank you so, so much. Okay, so we will go ahead and continue. I have a poll that I would like us to take. And okay. I was sorry. I was like, oh my gosh, we have a troll in the chat. What is this?
It's a quote for Princess Bride.
Okay, I was like, oh no. Okay, it's just Maggie giving us wonderful quotes. Okay, great. So I have a poll that I'd like us to do, and I'm going to try to launch it. And it's more of a survey. It's okay. All right, here we go. Since I said we're going to be talking about three very different writers, think back to your English courses you took in middle school, high school, university programs, or continuing education programs. All of it counts. Do you remember reading work by any of these three writers? And I'd like everyone to mark all that apply, or if you don't remember reading work by any of these writers, you can mark that. So everyone who wants to participate in this poll, go ahead and participate. And this is literally just my curiosity. And maybe it's even to make me feel better, because if I will give you the answer, I was an English major in college, and I loved my English courses in high school. And honestly, if I were to give my true answer before working here, I do not believe that I was assigned at least to read any work by these three writers. That was just my experience.
Ellen, you specifically meant like assigned. So not that we read them on our own, but that they were given to us as a part of an education experience.
That's a good point. I mean, we can broaden it. It can be that you read them on your own too. That's fine. Because at least you were aware of them. So that's more
I would have amended my answer. Well, that's okay.
Okay, that's no problem. I'm just curious. So, all right. I think if I could end the poll now so you guys can see. Okay. So based on how you interpreted the question, it looks like no one really was familiar with or was assigned to read or read on their own Lady May Wroth. And Probuck was the one. Okay, so relatively, about 54% of us have were familiar with Probuck and read some, only a little bit of Octavia E. Butler, and then Adina added that she discovered Octavia E. Butler later. Adina, when did you discover Octavia E. Butler?
Like 2 years ago.
Okay, so a few years ago, absolutely. And then a lot of us don't remember reading work by any of these authors. I would fall into that category. I did not discover Octavia E. Butler until about 2015, 2016, when I was processing the collection of a renowned African-American English scholar. And he taught a lot of Octavia E. Butler. And I remember wondering, Black woman and science fiction? I don't know a lot about that. Probuck was definitely from Martina and Mr. Williams, really helped me discover Probuck. And then Lady May Wroth, I would not have known about if it weren't for Miss Sandy. So fascinating. This is interesting. Okay, perfect. I just was curious about that. Okay, so I think the poll should have gone away now. Stop sharing. So thank you for participating in that. I was just curious to see kind of where we all were on the spectrum and kind of what we would have been aware of, throughout our primary, secondary, collegiate, and then our self-education. Awesome. So we're going to start in chronological order today, and we're going to talk about Lady Mary Wroth, who was a 17th century woman writer. And so she was just to give you some context, a contemporary of William Shakespeare. And Lady Mary Wroth is actually known as England's first female writer of fiction. And again, Miss Sandy Robinson brought Lady Mary Wroth to my attention through a marvelous and slightly mysterious article that appeared in the Smithsonian Magazine. So I've got some pictures that I know Miss Sandy wants to show, but Miss Sandy, can you tell us a little bit about your discovery of the article in the Smithsonian Magazine regarding Lady Wroth and kind of what intrigues you about the article and about Lady Mary Wroth's life?
Okay, first, let me apologize for my frog. I generally have my real face up, but I was updating my Zoom because I missed last month and somehow my picture got in there. So you're just going to have to hear my lovely voice. Anyway.
That is fine with us.
So I have a long-standing subscription to the Smithsonian Magazine, and it takes me quite a long time to get through because I read almost every article. So I came across one about this Lady Mary Wroth, that was written by Vanessa Braganza, and she's a book historian and critic of women's writing during the English Renaissance. And it sparked my interest. I love everything historic, women's history. So I shared the article with Joy Allen, who coincidentally knew a little bit about that and was setting up this month's meeting. Now, Braganza had attended a book fair in London where she came across this book that was published in 1632. And the monogram on the cover caught her attention. And it was a translation of Cyrus, the great Persian emperor in the 4th century. And Braganza had previously seen this photograph of the monogram 5 years earlier on a manuscript that was written by Lady Mary Wroth.
Miss Sandy, would you like me to go ahead and show it? Because I know you sent a picture.
Yes, I sent a picture of the monogram. Yeah. Anyway, and there's a connection later on as I speak. Anyway, Mary Wroth, Joellen spoke a little bit about Mary Wroth. Mary Wroth was born in 1587 into a famous literary family. And we're going to talk also about the picture of the library. Her father, Sir Robert Sidney, was a poet, served in the court of King James. Her uncle wrote several books. Her aunt, Mary Herbert, whose library picture was featured this morning in Where's Andrew? And Mary Herbert was the Countess of Pembroke. Sounds like a Jane Austen character. And she was a well-known patron of the arts, and she published poetry. So this was obviously an exposure that clearly shaped Mary Wroth. So Mary Wroth married, I'm just going to do a little history. Mary Wroth married Sir Robert Roth. He was a wealthy landowner. So she learned about court intrigue, and she even performed with Ben Jonson. She was a contemporary of Shakespeare. Unfortunately, her marriage wasn't a happy one. And when Roth died, she was left with enormous debt. Anyway, so perhaps her defining point was that Roth fell in love with a man who was not her husband, William Herbert, the 3rd Earl of Pembroke, love these names, and also her first cousin, Mary's son. And it was rumored that Shakespeare had dedicated these 100 love sonnets to a WH, and it was purported that it was him. Anyway.
That's a love triangle for another.
Intrigue. But anyway, the connection to this image is that Roth's only printed book was a romance entitled The Countess of Montgomery Urania. I don't know where they get these names. And it was about, that's William Herbert.
Oh yeah, this is William. Okay, so this is William Herbert. So this is the lover.
This is the lover.
This is the lover. Yes. And then this is
Mary
Wroth. And this is courtesy of the Folger Shakespeare Library. This is a part of the title page of The Countess of Montgomery's Urania.
So Mary Wroth was like Joellen said, was known as the forerunner of modern novels. And the first and only printed work she ever wrote was nearly 600 pages. And it was based mainly on her family and her acquaintances at court. And some of them weren't too happy because the similarities to actual people and events were too close to them, and they didn't like that. Anyway, Roth modeled her main characters, let me get this right, Pamphylia and Amphilanthus, after herself and her lover William. And if you look at the cipher on the book.
All right, let me get that back. Okay.
Now many authors and many people in that time were known to adorn books and jewelry and portraits with elaborate design. And this, and Mary Wroth created this, and it was thought if you take it apart, you'll see that the cipher is really the unscrambled names of the lovers in her book, Philanthia and Amphilanthus. And these were, again, really about her and Herbert.
Exactly.
So it was like, wow. Anyway, Herbert left her. She left court. She didn't write much of anything else during her time. I think that because she was kind of like disgraced, people in court were not happy with her story. So now Joellen spoke about the fire. The fire at Mary's house, it was known to have not left any books at all. So when Vanessa Braganza found this book and the monogram on top of it, she realized that this was in fact the genuine thing. And she couldn't buy the book, but she did, in fact, contact the Harvard Curator of Rare Books. And this particular book here is shelved in the Harvard Houghton Rare Books Library. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Absolutely. I think it's fascinating. And I think it's amazing that this graduate student was able to see this at a book fair and know, I think most of us would look at this and say, oh, it looks really cool. That's really interesting. But to know that there was a code behind it that spoke to Pamphylia and Amphilanthus, and that really mirrored Lady Wroth and Herbert. And it's incredible. It's like a novel itself. This love story, this forbidden romance. So I just think it's marvelous. So I would have never, and it's interesting though, because I will tell, I'm trying to zoom out of, okay, here we go. What I wanted to show you all too about the Countess of Montgomery's Urania, I find this fascinating too, because as Miss Sandy said, this text was 600 pages, when it was printed. And Mary Roth, actually, a lot of the characters that appear in the Countess of Montgomery's Urania, or just called Urania for short, actually mirror a lot of people, a lot of the nobility in England during that time. And I don't think that she masked that very much. So a lot of people saw themselves and they were scandalized. And so she was almost bullied by many people who were scathingly criticizing her work. She was called names as well. She was called some really mean names.
There was a story. There was a story of one of her critics who called her evil, and she basically wrote back and said, "Come on and say that to my face."
Exactly. She did not back down.
No.
So it was fascinating again to see not only a woman who is writing during, and publishing during a time when women were supposed to be, expressing only their thoughts through like religious meditations or domestic advice and in private spaces, but also she is having comebacks, or she's making comebacks to the people that are criticizing her. Now, the one thing that did happen is she did end up withdrawing the volume from publication because of all this criticism. So what that does,
she bought back some of the books.
Yes.
She withdrew it. And then eventually she withdrew from court because it was just too much for her to bear, and she had to leave.
Exactly. So fast forward to 2022, and what that does for us now is, there weren't many copies printed in the 17th century, and it was, later withdrawn. So, but now this Urania has become a cornerstone of feminist literature and of romance literature. So it's highly prized, it's in high demand, and there's very low supply of it. So that equals a rare book. So it's a very, very rare text, which is why we do not have one in the Bentley. They're very, very hard to get. So I will stop sharing for a second. Now, I did do some research through auctions, and based on my research, the last time Urania came on an auction was in 2007. And prior to that, I don't think it had been auctioned since 1974. So it doesn't come up very often. Unfortunately, it wouldn't show me the price that it got. So I don't know if anyone wants to seek and try to find that. I don't have the high subscription of Invaluable Auctions, so I wasn't able to see the price that it got, but I am very, very curious as to what it got in 2007. But if you want to know, and thank you so much, Miss Sandy, that was fascinating. It was perfect. And maybe one of these days we'll be able to get Urania in the Bentley. You never know. Miracles happen. You never know. But again, as Miss Sandy said, that Lady Wroth was a contemporary of Shakespeare. The Folger Shakespeare Library has done a really interesting webpage on her. I'm going to put that in the chat if you want to know more about her and about the importance of her book, her fiction book, Urania. But she's a fascinating woman writer, and she broke a lot of boundaries, and she kind of, quote unquote, acted up during a time when women really weren't able to do that. But I would like to acknowledge too that she did have a very well-heeled pedigree. She had a lot of wealth. She had the resources to be able to do that. And she had the family that was, that were writers. So she had privileges that allowed her to do that. But we still see that she still broke a lot of boundaries and did things during a time when women really weren't supposed to be doing those things. So I think she's a fascinating figure. She is featured in the Norton Anthology of Women Writers. She's featured in a lot of different reference books that you'll see. So next time you see Lady Wroth or Lady May Wroth, take a second look because she's a fascinating woman writer. So Thank you again, Miss Sandy. That was perfect. So now we are going to kind of move on to, we're going to fast forward many, many years, really to the late 19th century into the 20th century, then into the early to mid 20th century. And we're going to talk about an American writer, Pearl Buck. And I would like to give a little bit of biographical information, and then we're going to talk to Martina, who is going to talk to us about how she really fell in love with Pearl Buck's writing and what made her start collecting Pearl Buck, because Martina is a collector of Pearl Buck editions. So first, a little bit. So Pearl I believe it's Seidenstricker Buck, was born in 1892 in Hillsborough, West Virginia. But she did not stay there long because her parents had her when they were kind of on leave from their missionary work in China. But then she was whisked off as an infant back to China. And she spent roughly the first 40 years of her life living in China, and then roughly the next 40 years living in the US. So again, she was raised in China where her parents were doing missionary work. She was raised bilingual, speaking both Chinese and English. She did leave China for 4 years to study at Randolph-Macon College, but then she graduated in 1914 and went right back to China. And during that time, she married John Buck, who she would later divorce. They did not have a happy marriage, but they did have a daughter together, and I think they also adopted a daughter. But in 1934, she did leave China for good, and she settled in Pennsylvania. Pearl Buck was a prolific writer who published over 1,000 pieces, if you take all of her writings together. Her first writings were actually published in the 1920s in magazines and in periodicals. Her first novel, East Wind, West Wind, was published in 1930 by the John Day Company. And the John Day Company was the publisher who became the main publisher of her books. The following year, she published The Good Earth. Some of you may have heard of that in 1931, which was a bestseller, and it won a Pulitzer Prize. Many more writings followed, and she ended up marrying Richard Walsh, who was the publisher at John Day Company, in 1935. And then in 1938, she won the Nobel Prize in Literature. Her main philanthropic project included the establishment of an interracial adoption agency called the Welcome House Incorporated, which opened in 1949. And she also established the Pearl S. Buck Foundation, which is now called Pearl Buck International. They're very active. So I'd like us to talk to Martina. So again, Martina, can you because you really introduced a lot about Pearl Buck and her importance to me. I became excited about her because you were excited about her. So what made you fall in love with Pearl Buck's writing and her books? And can you tell us kind of how you started collecting those books?
A couple of years ago, I was kind of bored. It was Christmas time. I have no children, husband, or anything. So I was on eBay and I saw this box of Pearl Buck books for sale. There were 19 books and they were like $20. And so I bought them and they came, and I reread The Good Earth and just couldn't get enough of it, because her books, if you read them chronologically, they really and truly tell the story of China historically. And so I got so interested. I went online, I looked at how many books she had written, and I saw and made a list of 44 books and the years that they were published. And boy, I decided that I needed to read every single one of her books. And so I started reading them. And if you really want a great story, I know whenever I open a Pearl Buck book that I'm going to have a fabulous read. Unlike so many books nowadays, I think there's a lot of trash out there, but Pearl Buck did, like Joy Ellen said, won a Pulitzer and a Nobel Prize. Well, she won this Nobel Prize with a book called The Angry Wife. And I couldn't find a copy of that book anywhere. And I really started really working on it and realized that it was published under a pseudonym, John Sledge. And she wrote 5 of her books under this pseudonym. And the reason she did that is because women authors in the United States or in America were not very well thought of. And so she thought if she wrote it under a male's name, that she would get more attention for the book, which she did. And of course, went on to win the Nobel Prize. But she had a fascinating life. She was such an incredible person. There's a lot of quotes about Probuck. And she said, many people lose the small joys in the hope for a big happiness. And I just thought that one was great. And she read voraciously and read the novels of Charles Dickens once a year for the rest of her life when she discovered Charles Dickens. And she was in, I haven't read her biography yet. I've got the book. I just haven't had time to read it. But when she was in Nanking, and she and one of her husbands were in Nanking, and the Chinese had invaded, and she was able to stay with a Chinese family, or else she was pretty sure she would have been killed if the Japanese had, or the Japanese invaded China. And she was pretty sure that they would have killed her and her husband. So these people kept her, and their house was just kind of a hovel. But it was just such a kind thing for them to do because she was very well thought of in China. And I just am fascinated with this woman who grew up in China. So anyway, does anybody have any questions about her? One of the things that she did, she wrote a book called The Man Who Changed China. And it is literally the story of Shanghai Chek. And I just couldn't put it down. I just think she's a marvelous writer. And if you've not read a Probuck book in a long time, pick one up, any of them. They're wonderful books. Mandala was a love story that took place in India. She didn't always write books that took place in China. You know, she spread out and wrote books that occurred in other parts of the world as well, but very well educated, very well traveled, and just a wonderful woman.
Thank you so much, Martina. And Martina has been so gracious to donate her Probuck editions to the Bentley Rare Book Museum, which has been amazing. So now we are developing, all of Probuck's novels. We are having a collection of all Probuck's novels, thanks to Martina, and it has been fascinating. And it's been helping me too, because I get to just see different copies, and it's really, really cool to see. And some of them have different titles. The titles are different based on whether or not they were published in the US or the UK. And so that's been fascinating. And like Martina said, the pseudonym really, it was confusing, but Martina, fun thing, I found a tiny, tiny little booklet in the rare book room, and it said, like pen names of women writers. It's like it was someone's project or something.
Oh.
And it was funny. I wish I had known about it before, but I found it sandwiched in, but it was a tiny, tiny little book. And Probuck's pseudonym was in there, which I thought was really cool. But so we have just learned so much together about this. And also because Probuck is, her novels are more modern first editions, it's been helping me to determine, okay, whether or not, how do you know if this book is a first edition or not? Now, I wanted to touch on one thing that we talked about a little bit in the poll. Now, for most of us, Probuck was the author that if you were exposed to to one of these 3 authors we're talking about today in school or at some point in your life, it sounded like from the poll, it most likely was Probuck. Now, I talked to Mr. Williams about this because, again, I was an English major in college and we were not required to read any Probuck, and I didn't know why, because I took several American literature courses. And he said that she was very popular when she was writing, and kind of shortly thereafter. But she somewhat fell out of favor really in the 1960s and 1970s. And he said that many scholars and some readers actually became skeptical of this white Western woman writing mostly about the experiences of Asian people. And it was seen as potentially problematic. And, you know, everyone is entitled, of course, to their opinion on that. But I think one thing that we can credit Probuck with is, regardless of that, she really did help to build bridges between America and China, and she gave a lot of American people a lens into the world of China that they may not have had. And so that is something that she did. And then also, she was truly an activist. I did not know this until I did research. She was a lifelong NAACP member. She was good friends with W.E.B. Du Bois, and then, of course, very passionate about advocating for Asian children and mixed race Asian children, making sure they could get adopted. So that was really interesting to learn about her too, her activism, in addition to her writing. So I was looking at another bibliography, and it does say that Probuck has been for how prolific she was. She wasn't as she's a little bit understudied these days, I believe, in the grand scheme of women writers. She's a bit understudied. And so based on my research, I think I would kind of think that because of how much she has written, and for someone who did win the Nobel Prize in Literature. So one thing I wanted to show was a couple things that I found fascinating about the books, or the holdings we have about Probuck. So this is a picture of Probuck for when she was younger. For those who don't know what she looks like, that photo is courtesy of nobelprize.org. And then this picture is ours. This is just a snapshot of some of the wonderful editions that Martina has donated.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I just love putting them all
That's
together. I mean, I couldn't get them all in the picture, in the frame, but I just love looking at them next to one another. Now, this is a publication that we already had in the collection. We actually bought it because of, you see right here, this Madame to You by Langston Hughes. We bought it because of that. But then I noticed it has this kind of this premiere essay here, What America Means to Me by Pearl S. Buck. And I was looking at this publication, Common Ground, which is the publication of the Common Council for American Unity. And one of their purposes is to promote greater unity and understanding among all Americans. And I'm like, oh, okay, to overcome discrimination and to, you know, all these kind of things that I think Probuck would have been in support of. And then there's this essay by her. It's a great essay. I've scanned it all. I didn't put it all here, but she talks about kind of what America means to her, and especially growing up so much in, across, in China. So it's an interesting, it provides interesting insight into her life and kind of how she viewed America, and especially with her perspective of growing up in more Eastern countries. So I thought that was interesting. So just so everyone knows, we have that. Another thing I wanted to highlight about the text Martina has given us, which has taught me a lot about first editions and about publishers. So this is Dragon Seed by Probuck, published by the John Day Company, courtesy of Martina. So again, the John Day Company was Probuck's main publisher. So the first editions of her work or first editions of her novels, I should say, are most likely going to be published by the John Day Company. But then I found some other editions. Oh, okay, well, this is Dragon Seed again. So sorry, that was just part of the John Day Company. But then I found some other editions by Collier and Son, which I thought was fascinating because they look really similar. And the ones by Collier and Son, they never have a date on them. But I was so confused by this because they're nice copies. But what I learned is that with the help of Mr. Williams, he helped me figure this out. So when Probuck's books would go out of print, when John Day Company wasn't printing any more of them, Collier's, P.F. Collier's, another great publisher, would pick them up and start printing cheaper copies, so more economical copies for people. And they wouldn't date them. So I think did I get a picture of that? Yeah. So they would put the original copyright of the book, but they wouldn't date that printing. So they made a lot of undated reprints that only have the original copyright date. So these copies are likely from within the first 10 years of the book's publication, but they're just not the first editions. The first editions are, again, more likely going to be from the John Day Company. So I thought that was fascinating. I don't know if anyone else cares about that, but I felt like I solved a bit of a book mystery because I really was confused. I was like, why do these look so similar, but they don't have any type of extra date? So Mr. Williams helped me figure that one out, which was really, really fun. So again, I have been learning so much from the collections that Martina has been giving us.
Oh, good.
I love it. I spend so much time. I probably spend a little too much time with each copy because I get fascinated. But one book that really helps me is called First Editions, A Guide to Identification. I forgot who the author is, but it's a really helpful book for me. And because it really goes through, I don't know who this person who wrote this book, I guess, contacted all sorts of American publishers and said, hey, how do y'all denote first editions? And they responded. And so anyway, it's a great help. It's a great tool when you're trying to figure out, is this a modern first edition or not? So I like to use that. But anyway, thank you so much, Martina, for talking, and thank you for donating and for continuing to donate our Probuck editions, because I'm learning so much through each of them.
Okay. I've got more coming.
Perfect. Yay. On our way. So lastly, I wanted to talk about an African-American author named Octavia E. Butler, born in 1947 in Pasadena, California. And Octavia E. Butler, I think, is the epitome of an author who was definitely talking about things kind of before her time, before things became popular. She kind of created a genre before it was even recognized as a genre. So Octavia Estelle Butler, again, was born in 1947 in Pasadena, California. She was raised by her mother and her grandmother, and she was a renowned African-American writer who broke boundaries for Black writers in science fiction. And she was a recipient of a MacArthur Genius Award, which is a huge deal, a huge honor. So I wanted to read something courtesy of OctaviaButler.com. They said that though the MacArthur grant made life easier in her later years, she struggled for decades when her dystopian novels exploring themes of Black injustice, global warming, women's rights, and political disparity were, to say the least, not in commercial demand. During these years of obscurity, Butler, always an early riser, woke at 2 a.m. every day to write, and then went to work as a telemarketer, potato chip inspector, and dishwasher, among other things. She passed away on February 24th, 2006. At the time of her death, interest in her books was beginning to rise, and in recent years, sales of her books have increased enormously as issues that she addressed in her Afrofuturistic feminist novels and short fiction have become more relevant. So it's unfortunate that after she died, a lot of these things that we probably hear about more, like Afrofuturism and things like that, have become really popular. But she was writing about them before many people were really aware that this was a thing. So there are so many books about Octavia E. Butler that we could talk about. But today we're going to focus on her novel, Dawn, which was published in 1987. And Dawn is about one woman who, under the surveillance of an alien race, is called To Rebuild Humanity After a Nuclear War. So really, really interesting book. We started collecting novels by Octavia E. Butler in 2020, not only to diversify our science fiction collections here in the Rare Book Museum, but also to simply add one of the most prominent voices in science fiction to our collection, because she helped make the genre. So, but one thing that I found interesting is that Amber Smith, our records manager, is an avid science fiction collector and has been for a really long time. Amber brought something very interesting to my attention that I didn't know about the covers of Octavia E. Butler's novels, because sometimes I think we just take covers for granted and we just think, oh, that's just the cover. So I'm going to show some pictures, but Amber, can you tell us a little bit about how you kind of found this cover discrepancy and kind of what made you notice this? I don't know, just tell us a little bit about how you came to know about this issue.
Well, I have a lot of friends who actually work in publishing. So I get first-hand accounts of, what's going on today, still, what's going on 50 years ago, however many years ago, because it's still an issue today about the covers of what they put on the covers. Particularly, mostly what I know about is sci-fi and fantasy. They've changed over the years where it's currently more like floral patterns or spaceships or something. But back in like 60s through the 80s, 90s, kind of, they still like putting people on the covers. And part of the thought process behind it all was what's going to sell this book. And a lot of the times they did not care what the actual content of the book was. They're just going for what's going to sell. And still today, you still get this a lot. The thought is that if it's got a person of color on it versus someone who is white, the white cover is going to sell better. And, that's where the thought process came. It's whitewashing is basically. I came to know about this by other authors who it's still happening today. This would happen. And then they would give examples like Octavia Butler, and it happened to her. And there's very other authors too I could go into that this has happened to. And this is what happened with Dawn in its first publishing. I've got a library. The image that Joy Ellen's going to show you here in just a second is a library edition of the Dawn. Let's see.
And let me bring it
I haven't
up.
found a hardback copy yet.
And,
yeah.
Okay. So I love this. Okay. So on the left here, this is Amber's copy from 1987.
Yes.
And then on the far right, this is also Amber's copy from 2021.
Big difference.
Big difference. And
Big difference.
in
I also
the middle,
think they were thinking Sigourney Weaver must be sellable, because I really feel like they turned the cover into it almost like they were thinking of Aliens or something, Alien or Aliens kind of
exactly.
motif.
It's like an evolution. In the middle is the Bentley Rare Book Museum's copy of Dawn, and this is from 1997.
Yeah.
So we see it's like a little evolution of covers, which is fascinating. So in this and also just to give people an idea, so Amber, the one on the left, the 2021, that's a trade paperback cover. This one on the right is like a mass market. It's smaller, right? A mass market copy.
And this one actually was one of the ones that they would have sent out to libraries.
Okay.
Like this would
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So they would have sent that to libraries. So we get to see. So in 1987, I don't know if Amber, if you have any insight. In 1987, I guess Octavia E. Butler, she wouldn't have been a huge name, right? At that time, I don't think.
She would have been a bigger name. I don't know, because the genre itself was still, I mean, it's been, sci-fi fantasy has been around, decades. But I think in the 80s, you would have seen more women coming up through the ranks than what you would expect. But it was still very much still male-dominated kind of world. But you would have seen her becoming more popular in the 80s, and then it tapered off. And then back in the early mid 2000, fortunately, when she passed, it skyrocketed again with popularity.
Interesting. That's fascinating. And it's just it's just fascinating to see because now in the book, the character is a Black woman, right?
Mhm,
So
absolutely, yeah.
it just seems like this cover would just again would be completely misleading, really.
Oh, yeah. And they did that, a lot, and that's, the American version. I haven't got my hands on it because this is something I do. I like collecting books, like the same book, but different editions of that book, even if it's overseas. If you look behind me here, this is all the same book. It's just different editions and different countries that have done it. And it happens for her. Unfortunately, there's other covers out there. I found one from Finland that's very much still that whitewashed.
Interesting.
And yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't show the actual depiction of it. And sometimes that's deliberate because they think it's going to sell better. Other times, depending on the publishing company and where they're located, whatever image they have, they're just going to slap an image on it just because that's what they have. They don't have money to buy anything else. And it's, just a generic, here we go, we're going to put this on there without probably even reading the book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I have a question. I've never read Dawn, but you said she's most definitely a Black character.
Yeah.
So is she fully described as a Black character? Do you get that idea as you're reading it? So back in 1987, they're like, this character doesn't match the picture on the front. Would people catch that or?
Not until after they buy it. After that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's harsh and really not cool, but yeah.
Yeah, because I'm like, are they? Yeah, I guess the publisher. I guess they just care about people buying it or
they
being
just want to sell the book. They don't. Yeah.
It's fascinating. Wow. So I'm so glad Amber brought that to my attention because I only had seen this because again, this is a Bentley's copy here in the middle. I had only seen that one, and I just now I'm super interested and a little bit more sensitive to the difference in covers now of some of our more marginalized authors. So I find that fascinating. And then for those this is a picture of Octavia E. Butler. For those who may not know what she looks like when she was alive. But one thing I also wanted to share, Amber, I think you'll like this. I went on octaviaebutler.com and I noticed that they have this beautiful kind of just panoply of her covers. And I noticed which ones they decided to, again, they're probably, want people to buy them. So they're marketing, but I thought it was interesting. They had some of the vintage covers, but not all the vintage covers. So here it is. If you go, so this is again, octaviaebutler.com. So they have this Lilith brood, the beautiful covers, but then they've got, of course, they got the graphic adaptation of Kindred. And in the rare book room, we have these more vintage covers from before.
Oh, that's a beautiful.
Beautiful. So these are some of the older covers.
Love those.
From the 90s. And they've got this one that looks like this was even earlier. But they don't have like all the
they don't have the first editions of Dawn.
Yeah. So they've got
you can understand.
Exactly. So I thought this was nice that they have just this beautiful kind of presentation of, and it is really fascinating to see all these beautiful artwork. And so anyway, I thought you might like that just as a collector.
And these were probably more, she got more approval, like as she got popular, she would have had a little bit more say in what her covers look like. When she was first starting with, Dawn and some of the other ones, she wouldn't have gotten any probably input on what was actually put on the cover of her books.
Exactly. Yeah. Last thing I wanted to make everyone aware of, there is going to be, I'm going to put in the chat, I believe there's going to be a new Amazon series based on Octavia E. Butler's novel, Dawn. And Ava DuVernay is going to be, I think, directing it or producing it or something. I think, anyway, I'm going to put the link if anyone is interested in science fiction and wants to know more about Octavia E. Butler and wants to see this adaptation of Dawn. I think this is happening. So anyway, if anyone is interested, it's really cool to see some of these authors that maybe didn't receive some of the attention or accolades that they deserve when they were alive, continuing to be revived by contemporary authors and filmmakers and people like us who are just talking about them in these spaces. So I think that's great. Thank you so much, Amber, for sharing that. Oh yeah, Martina.
I just wanted to mention one other female author that wrote a book that is just one of my most favorite books in the world. And it's called The Far Pavilions by MMK.
Mm-hmm.
And she did not start writing until she was 70 years old. So she's a wonderful author.
Okay, wonderful. MMK. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you told me about. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Yes, and if anyone else has recommendations, women writers that maybe that they don't think people would be aware of, please do put them in the chat so that we can read together and encourage each other to read. If March is a perfect time to start. So I think that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Martina. Well, that concludes our program for today. I did want to let everyone know, if you can mark your calendars, our next Coffee with a Curator program is going to be on April 20th. And we are going to honor Passover, and we are going to talk about the Bentley Rare Book Museum's fascinating collection of Haggadot, which are the texts used during the Passover Seder. And it's going to be really exciting. So if you celebrate Passover and or you have a Haggadah that you think you might want to show, please do send me an email. I know that's Passover. I think that's actually Passover week. So some people might be traveling or they might be busy. I completely understand. The week before, though, on April 11th, I'm going to have an in-person event showcasing the Haggadot, and it's going to be in the KSU Center. So parking is a lot easier, and it's going to be lots of fun. So I'm going to send some information to this group about that. So again, you can either come to the in-person program, you can come to the virtual program, or you can come to both. But it's going to be very exciting. And if you do come to the in-person program, Dr. Catherine Lewis is going to be making some haroset, actually from homemade. So it should be really exciting and fun. But more information will be coming about that. But thank you all so much for joining us today. This was a great discussion. Thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you for that. Truly enjoyed it. And it was great to see everybody. And we will see you next month. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. This is so cool.
Thanks. All right. Bye-bye.